Okay, guys, all right, welcome back. We are back here in the control room. So we are going into some of the post-production techniques, okay, that I'm going to show you guys. So last week, we already recorded all the drums, right, all the drum parts. So let's start by just taking a quick listen back to a little bit of what we had last week, okay? So we had all the additional overdubs, the main drum tracks here, and the overdubs or the ride cymbal part and the bridge drum section. Okay, great. Sweet, all right. Okay, cool. That's a quick sort of a refresher, right, for my ears as well to sort of refresh how it sounds in here lah. It sounds great. To me, the drum performance was really good. And when we talk about the drum editing and drum sample replacement, this is more of a creative and a more of a production decision. Now, you always have to ask the question, right? You always have to sit down with a band. You want to discuss with the band always at the start. What's the direction? What is the concept of the final output they want? Do they want it to be raw? Do they want it to be very polished? They want it to be like very perfect, highly produced. So it's always useful to sit down with the band, sit down with the artist that you're working with, have them bring them some references, bring some references or maybe some bands that they like to sound like, right? So once you know what the references are, then you can sit down and decide. You can think, okay, is it really achievable or not? Okay, and there are several reasons why. From the technical aspects, you have the studio, for example. If the drum sound in the reference that they give you is like, wow, this huge arena like kind of sound with a lot of room, right, inside, but the studio recording it is only very small room, it's very dry, right? You cannot get a good room sound. You can't put room mics out of it. Then you already know that okay, you can't achieve that. You're going to have to use some kind of post processing lah, right? You either have to use a lot of reverb or you have to use you know start using some samples, right, with an ambient room sound in it. Or on the other hand, right, they have this particular drum, again, due to budget, maybe you can't rent a kit. The project is looking for wow, they want a very 60s kind of vintage sound. With that, you need an old Ludwig or you need an old Rogers or Slingerland, that kind of kit, right? If you go for a very modern, contemporary drum kit, it's very hard to get that kind of sound. It's a very specific sound. If you want to get a vintage drum sound, you need to get a vintage drum. So maybe this means that you have to use samples, lah, right? Yeah, because it's very hard, right? Simply because the sound source is different already. Okay, now the third part and then the point which not everyone likes to hear, down to the player, right? This is the real source. Can the player really play like that or not? Right? Can the drummer really deliver that kind of performance and that kind of delivery? Okay. So if they can, right, in this case, of course, Shuhaib was the drummer for Violet Remains. Awesome. He did a great job, lah. Okay. And the track as it is great. It stands great on its own. I'll be perfectly happy to use it the way it is. But if you're working with a not so great drummer, not so consistent, the groove is not very tight, his playing's not so tight, dynamics is a little bit off, sometimes loud, sometimes soft, sometimes the tone is different or something like that. Okay, then that's where you have to pull out some of your tricks lah and tools of the trade lah, right? So there's two which I'm going to show you. First one I'm going to talk about is drum editing. Okay, now I hope that you all never have to do it because This is one of the most energy sucking and soul sapping processes that you can ever do, okay? But it also boils down to, again, earlier what I said about what's the concept, what's the direction. If you're talking about, if you're talking about a style that's you want something that's very highly produced, that's very heavily polished, okay, then yes, you will probably need to involve some editing, right, and some kind of drum samples as inside, right, include a little bit of drum samples. But if the band wants to keep it raw, if you're going for a much more raw feel, raw vibe, then leave it as it is, lah. Okay, a little bit of imperfections, a little bit of timing, a little bit of rush, a little laid back here and there, then it's fine. You want to keep it raw, you want to keep it real. Okay, now, so for this song, okay, it is geared towards a little bit more polished side, right? So what I've gonna do is actually I'm gonna do a little bit of editing, not too much. I'm not going to like quantize and everything aligned to a grid, okay? Because that will just make it, it would just make everything sound robotic and lifeless, okay? Now, unless you want to, unless that's what you're going for, lah, right? But if that's the case, you might as well program, right? You should program drums, right? If you want everything to be super perfect and tight. Okay, but there's some situations where I've encountered and I've worked and where there's really no choice lah, but I have to, edit every single drum beat, every part. And that is usually the case where again lah, it's down to the player, the drummer just can't deliver. Okay, but having said that also, I have done that. Okay, I've unfortunately I had to do it. Now I'm going to sort of sidetrack a little bit because this I want to give you scenarios lah and situations of real life of what has happened. First scenario was a band that did kind of pop punk emo. Right, very first song they did, the drummer, the parts that they came up with, right, was way too technical, right? It's way too complicated that he cannot pull off. So what happened was for that very first song, I said like, you know, you definitely can't deliver, you can't pull it off, but you need to do this song and you get it done with this the same time. For you to go and practice and to get to the level where you need to be, right? It's not a process that's gonna take few days. It's not a process that's gonna take few weeks. It's gonna take 6 months. It's going to take a year for you to go back to practice to get to that level. All right. So in the end, in this process, as a producer, right, we talked with the band, we were very transparent with them. We decided to go, all right, no choice lah. Let's program the kid. So I programmed the kid to follow his performance, the drummer's performance. All right. So in the end, great, everyone was happy. The story turned out very, very well though, because when they came back later for the second song, the drummer improved, practiced, and from the second song onwards, okay, the drummer, it was the real drummers all the way already. So that was has a good happy ending lah. Okay. Now, second story, right, was a band which was going to record their entire album, full album, 10 songs, and this band flew in from outstation. The whole band flew in, right, here. And the plan was to book the studio for a whole month because they spend about a whole month here to finish recording the album before they fly back again. Right, so that was really commitment lah. This band was very, very committed. So singer is a very talented. It's amazing. The singer, the main guitarist, very, very talented. But the drummer didn't have experience, right? So it got to a point where like, oh no, it was a situation where it was a situation where it's not really usable. So again, sit down, have a meeting, discussion. Okay, do we program it? Okay, because you're not really at that level lah, and you're already here already, right? You're already here. All right, there was no way for me to do pre-production in this case lah, because the band was outstation. From outstation, they can't fly over here. See, so what's the choice, right? Do we have to program it? Okay, but in this case, the band, they were really determined. They really begged me and said, "Oh, we really want to play." And because I saw we want to really be the ones that actually really played an album lah, and because kind of I saw where they are, it made them feel a little bit better that if the drummer actually played on the record, it ended up being actually him. So we decided in the end, okay, we'll go with the real drums, but I'll have to do editing lah. I do a lot of editing, okay? Literally almost every beat need to edit. So it is possible, but also very important, okay? If you need to really edit all the drums, you need clean hits. So even though the timing is off, as long as your hits are clean, if the drummer's hits are clean, right, then you can edit. If the hits are not clean, right, so for example, if you get a situation where you get kick and snare supposed to play together, but you get a situation where you get the snare a little bit early, you get the bra kind of thing. Now that is going to be very, very difficult and very hard to solve. Okay, not to say you can't, you can, right? But it'd be very hard, lah. But if you have clean tracks, it's possible to edit. Okay, right. So let's dive into it now. Let's take a look. Okay, so these are the original tracks that we got from last week. Let me mute everything else first. Let's just listen to the drums only lah. Now I'm gonna turn on the click so that we can sort of hear it. Now, obviously, when you hear when you listen back with the click, you can actually hear the little bit of imperfections kind of stand out a little bit more lah. All right. Okay, here we go. Okay. Okay. Okay, right. I'm not going to go to the whole song. We're just going to listen. This is the intro only, right? And majority of the issues were actually more towards the intro. Also because that was, the early stage of the recording session, still kind of getting into the groove lah. So let's listen very closely, okay? Now, try and listen to the kick drum. The groove of it kind of pushes and pulls a little bit, So the kick drum, especially the tuk ta, it goes one, it pushes then goes down, ta tuk ta, so that tuk ta tuk tuk, right? That second set of the two kicks, right? That third kick drum, it's always a little bit late, so it always feels like it's forward pushing, tuk ta tuk tuk ta, it has a little bit of that sense lah, right? Of that kind of pulling back kind of thing. So in some styles of songs, that's actually cool. That's actually good. And that's actually more of the drummer's natural groove, right? It's actually groove. It's not a bad thing, right? I'm not saying that this is bad. But I feel that for this song, because it's going more towards a more modern rock ballad kind of a vibe, kind of a feel, we want to make it a little bit more consistent, lah, a little bit more straighter. Okay. So what I feel is I needed to edit this. So one very key thing and something that when it comes to drum editing, some people actually don't realize and don't forget this. If you are editing a drum performance, right, a real recorded drums, you always have to look at the whole drum kit, not as separate instruments. You're not looking at the kick as a separate thing. You're not looking at the snare, the toms as a separate thing. This is actually one single entire capture using different microphones. Okay, right? So that's very, very important because I've encountered some situations where they edited. If the kick is out, okay, what they did was, if the kick was a bit late, they only move this. They only edit the kick, and right, and then edited that and moved that. What happens in this case if you do this in a real recorded drum kit? Guess what happens, right? Any idea, guys? Any idea? Remember, your microphones, your overhead, everything else is also picking up and also hearing the kick drum. So what happens in this case is that if you only move the close mic of the kick, you still hear the kick drum from the rest of the kit, which is out. So you hear a bit of plug, you can hear that artifact. So and some people make this mistake because if you're working with a program, you're working in MIDI, yes, you can edit just the kick and you just move it there, then it's fine. But when you deal with actual recorded audio tracks, You cannot do that because you will get this, the timing will go off, right? You get phasing. The worst is the least obvious, you get some phase issues. The most obvious, you will hear an obvious flam lah, kind of thing. But even though it's very soft because it's in the overheads, but you still hear it, okay? And it will spoil the whole thing lah. So the first thing you need to do whenever drum editing, when it involves all this, you always have to edit this as a whole, right? Very important. So if I want to move this kick, for example, I need to do this. I need to edit this and move the whole section forward. You cannot just take the kick drum and move forward, run. You have to do this whole thing, right? So now, in Cubase, and I'm sure in any other DAW, you always have the same thing. You can always group the tracks lah, okay? So let me show you here. Okay, let's see, edit, group, right? So when you group a track, what happens is that any kind of move or any kind of edit you do to it, it treats it as a group. This is more of a time saving thing lah, right? Makes it a little bit faster. So instead of having to select all and edit, select all, you just select one pop, automatically it selects all. Okay, so there should be some feature like that in your own DAW lah. You can always group tracks together, so you can always edit it. Okay, so let's go. Let's say, for example, if I want to go real crazy, okay, wow, everything I want to record right to the grid. So for fun, let's just try and do that and see, okay? It will probably ruin the feel. It makes everything sound robotic. Okay, so let's start. So this kick drum, as you can see, now, if it's supposed to land on the end of the two, 1, 2, and, this is a bit early already because the end is actually here. So, right, for exercise purposes, I'll show you what we're doing, what I'm going to do lah. Okay, so what we want to do is that I will, right, trim, I will cut it, right? Let me turn off the snap off so it doesn't snap. Okay, let me expand the waveform a little bit, zoom in so you can see a little bit clearly. Okay, now a couple of options. Now you can, if you want, go as close as possible, but for me, I roughly lah, right? I kind of just eyeball it only because again, we don't want to be super perfect also. Okay, again, if you're super perfect, you might as well just program it. So make sure now this is already all selected. Okay, so a reference to the kick, roughly lah here. You see the waveform. Now you obviously do not want to cut it here, okay, because you are chopping off the transient. So chop it off before lah. Let's say here, right? Roughly here. Okay, now let's see. Okay, so let's just focus on this. So now what I will do next is I will do this. I will do a snap. So snap here means that it will snap to the grid. Okay, right? So for editing purposes, I turn on the grid. So sometimes I will turn it off. When I'm selecting edit point, I turn off my snap. Okay, but when I want to start moving it, I turn on the snap so I can, it's faster lah to move it to the grid point. Okay, you can of course, right, leave it off all the time and just move it manually if you want, but for editing purposes, I find it a little bit more, it's faster lah, right, if you are going to do this. So let's drag it here. Okay, so it snaps. Okay, and then this part, right, so what happened, this segment of the clip starts to overlap with the next segment already. I need to pull this back, right? And the next thing you do, whenever you have an edit point, very important, when you're editing two files together, you need to do a crossfade. So crossfading is, right, when this clip on the left, right, where it overlaps, it will fade it out, right? It does a gentle fade out, and then the clip on the right, it will fade back in. So this is to prevent digital pops and clicks. Okay, because if you just simply do a cut, sometimes it will cut off the waveform, you see. And in digital, you can't do that. You will get a click, you get a click sound, right? And this kind of things is very hard to sort of fix lah. You have to fix it, right, in your post production. So here, right, you need to do a crossfade, of course, right? Again, your DAW will have your own shortcut, but in Cubase it's X. So I do an X. Now, This is kind of the default crossfade, but generally when it comes to drums, this is a bit too wide because you can hear the thing fading in, fading out. You will hear a little bit of a glitch, like, it still sounds like a little glitch, right? So you need to adjust the crossfade position. So what I do, now I will turn the snap off again, because otherwise it will always snap to the grid. So generally speaking, rule of thumb is you want to bring this as close as possible to the next transient, which is here, the snare. So let's bring it here, zoom it across, right? So here, and keep this crossfade as short as possible. Okay, so like that. So this part you can delete already lah. Okay, right? So that's what you get. So this is a flam, a snare and a tom. So that was fine. That's memang meant to be a bit not exactly on the dot one because it's a flam. Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay. Alright, okay. So again, for exercise purposes, right, let's do this. So this kick, as you can see, slightly earlier than the down beat. So I'm the gridiron producer, remember? Okay, all right, from last week's topic. I'm the gridiron producer. I want everything to be perfect. Everything must be on time, on the grid one. So here we go. So turn off the snap. Okay, let's go a bit crazier. Let's go right on the waveform here. Now I turn it back on. Move this. Okay. Move this over here, or I can always pull it over here. Also can lah. Both sides also can. Same thing. Crossfade. Adjust the region. Move it until okay. There you can see the on the right hand side the kick drum start appearing again. That means you've gone too far. Here. Then shorten the region as much as possible. Okay. Okay, then repeat. Okay. Snare, right? Snare is also slightly late. Okay. I want it to be perfect. Same thing. Okay, now I'll move a bit faster. Okay, so this is my actual pace when I do it lah. Here we go. This one is slightly late. Slightly early, sorry. Okay. So on and so forth. Crossfade again. Okay, right. Let's do this for about 4 bars lah. Now, if you want to go even more detail, right? Generally, most of the time we kind of use the kick and the snare as our usual reference lah, right? Because the hi-hat and the right is more of your internal groove. The groove is kind of still maintained on the right, so maybe we don't touch that. But again, you have to judge using your hearing lah. But let's say if you want to go really crazy, right? Okay, I want the right cymbal also to be exactly on time. Okay. This right is a bit late. Okay. Okay, let's go a bit crazy, right? At the end of this will probably sound terrible. Okay, I guarantee it will sound bad. It will sound lifeless. Okay, and so on and so forth. This kick is late. Let's pull it to the grid. Okay, so rinse and repeat lah. The next one. Okay, then this snare is early. Okay, so drum editing, right? It's a little bit of a pitfall. A pitfall means it's like a trap. It's a trap that once you get into it, sometimes the only way out is to go down deeper. Okay. The funny thing about when you do start doing drum editing is when you kind of fix one part, it makes the other parts feel out. Then you have to start fixing the other one. In some situations, especially in the case of when I tell you with the not so experienced drummers, and you end up having to edit everything. The thing is, you cannot just fix one section one. You end up having to fix the whole thing, because when you fix one section and it sounds great in time already, it makes our brain, right? It makes everything else sound out. So as I say lah, it's a pitfall. once you fall into it, the only way is to dig the hole deeper and deeper and deeper until you get out the other side of the planet. Okay, right? So that's what happens. Okay, let's do a little bit more. Let's go maybe up to 4 bars lah, right? Okay. Okay, this kick actually is pretty close, right? Okay lah, maybe I got a bit lazy, a bit fed up. Okay, I just leave this here. This snare is a bit early. Okay, I can see here this riot here looks like it's on time, so that's okay. Let's move the snare back on the grid. Okay, crossfade. Now in this case, I pull it back. Crossfade a bit more. So as you can see, this is a very, 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 very tedious process, which can take hours and or sometimes more lah, right? Sometimes it can take up to half a day if it's really, really complex. That's also a reason why a lot of metal, a lot of the metal and all of the thrash metal, death metal, and all that kind of stuff, they use program because, to be honest, lah, right, the drummers just simply cannot play to that level of perfection, lah, right. Now, I have worked with some metal bands though, which have that kind of a very good drummer who can do it, right? And in that case, there's again, it was a discussion with the band. They wanted to keep it. It was not 100% perfect, but he was able to do all the strokes, although not super perfect. The discussion was let's keep it that way. And sometimes when some bands do that, I actually respect their decision for that because they really want to keep it real, lah. Okay, so as a producer, these are the decisions you have to make lah. Okay, this kick is wow, pretty on the dot. It's perfect actually. So I don't need to move this kick. This snare is slightly now again, right? If you listen to it without the click, it actually sounds fine. No, it's when you start listening and referencing to the click track, then you only start to hear all the slight imperfections here and there. And Shuhaib is already a very good drummer. Okay, he's really, really tight, right? So fixing all these issues doesn't make it better, it makes it worse because what you do is you remove his natural groove, right? You take away the human element already, you're making it very, very robotic. But again, this is more of an exercise lah, just an exercise to show you guys how the process happens. Right, okay, so this is a very, very time consuming process. So if you can, and if you can afford it, all right, sometimes what I do, all right, I sub the workout to another engineer, or if I have an intern lying around, okay, intern, come here, okay, do this. When you're done, call me, okay, right? Okay, because this can be a tedious work. But the thing is, right, unless your assistant or the person that's doing it for you knows what you want, okay, all right, or knows the project, right? You can't, as a producer, sometimes you have to brief lah. You have to brief them, hey, we still want to keep the vibe, the feel, the groove, so don't change it too much, right? So you tell them, must let them know lah, right? You cannot just leave the job and say, hey, edit this for me. You have to give them some clear directions or what it is. On the other hand, the other extreme is, right, I want everything to be perfect, okay? Then you tell the engineer, right, or intern to do it that way. You should always indicate clearly because it's still a production decision. It's still a creative decision how you want to edit this. You don't just look at it on a more of a technical thing. It's a creative thing as well. Okay, all right. How much more is there? Oh my god. Okay. So if we were to really do this one by one, can you imagine how long this is gonna take? Right? It'll take us until literally end of the day lah. Okay. Yeah, I'll just do a little bit more, a few more, and then we will stop. or you do until you give up. Okay, go take a break, come back and do it again. Okay, right. This one, move a little bit, crossfade, check the crossfade point. This snare is cannot 1 millisecond too early. Okay, unacceptable. Okay, this one you can almost hard. It's hard to hear one. What's the difference, lah? Okay, right. So this one's slightly late. Let's bring it here. Okay, I think that's enough. All right. So literally on a drum track, right? You can, if you really count the edits, it's literally thousands of edits lah. And that's so when sometimes you hear people, oh, there's thousands of edits on this song. Yeah, it's possible. It is possible. Okay. So let's see how this sounds like. Okay, now as you can see, it's ruined already. Okay, because what happened is now the groove that's done by the right. Let's turn off the click. Sounds funny already. Okay, you hear the right now. It sounds a little bit off already. So you doing this can sometimes be harmful lah, right? So you you have to be very wise, right? Make a wise judgment call and decision on how far do you want to do it. Okay, is it really improving it, or is it making it worse, right? So if it's making it worse, probably don't do it lah, right? Or don't do what I just did, which is like edit every single hit, right? Maybe just move only one or two things. So having said that, I've actually done all that already before this lah. Okay, I've already done all the editing prior to this, which is you can see hiding down here. It's inside this folder. So what I'm gonna do, let's mute all the old drums. Okay, let me disable the track first so that we won't hear it anymore. And these are all the edited drums. Okay, let's take a listen to it. All right. So okay, let me move these. These are the MIDI samples, MIDI tracks, the trigger tracks. So as you can see, I didn't go, I went a little bit crazy at first, right? Because as I mentioned, the intro was the one that had the most work for me to sort of pull together. But when you get to the verse, you see this whole verse section, I didn't edit, didn't leave it, right? It's more towards there's a little bit of drum fills here, a little bit of editing here. See, but there's whole stretches like in the chorus and in the verses where I didn't touch, you know, right? There's whole longer stretches. So I didn't go in and edit every single hit until it's perfection, you see. So I preserve as much as possible, the drummer's original performance, his original groove. Just maybe a few parts there, here and there, which I maybe felt a bit lagging, a little bit pushing, just to make it a little bit more consistent. So let's just take a listen to this. All right. Listen with the so here the kick is a little bit more consistent lah, the pattern, yeah, in the intro. Verse I didn't touch. Okay, except here the little tom fill I just made a little bit tighter. Okay, right, maybe very very quickly here there's a little thing. Okay, so I edited this because maybe let's listen to the old one so we can hear what happened over there. Okay, listen to that. Okay, it's a bit rush, it sounds like it rushed a little bit, it makes the whole thing feel, it was grooving very nicely, so that came in a little bit early. So that was the only thing that I moved. So I adjusted it over here. So a couple of things during the tom fills, but large parts of it, right, were fairly unedited lah. Okay, so let's mute the old one again. Go back to the new tracks. Let's continue from there. Yeah, so I preserved his performance, just made it better. Pre-chorus, all hardly anything. Chorus, not much. A little bit here. Okay, right. So you notice this was coming out of the fill. I had a little edit here. I think in the old one, I can visually try and look and see. Okay. Looks like in the old track it was oh no, the old track looks like it's on time. It looks like the drum fill was a little, yes, was a little bit laid back. Okay, so you can actually identify lah, right? Most of the time, drummers will either they'll naturally rush a little bit going into a tom fill, and then at the end of it, sometimes they'll slow down and a little bit. So you have that rush and the speeding up and slowing down when it's going in the drum fill. So you can see most of the edits are going to happen around these areas lah, near where the drum fills are. Okay. Again, it's a natural thing. In some styles of music, if you want to keep it a little bit more real, a bit more natural, leave it, because that's a natural groove for the drummer. But here I want it again, make it sound a bit more polished, so I just tweak it a little bit lah. Right. Move on a little bit. Okay, I think in this verse there was this same thing with the hi-hat. It was a kind of a maybe his tendency lah. Okay, second verse, huh? First one okay, but it's the second one. Yeah, that he always rushes it. Yeah. Same thing. Pre-chorus, tom roll, everything perfect. No editing needed. Second chorus. Not much. This little, just move it a little bit. Yes, right? Okay, this is the bridge. Okay, right. So if you remember, right, I actually recorded the kick drum and the snare. We did one take of the kick drum, while we recorded the kick drum separately. And I recorded the snare rolls, the marching snare rolls separately. I did 2 takes of it. So the reason why is I want to have a little bit more better control, and I want to sort of process this later down the line. So the kick drum, in the end, what I did was I actually took one. I just sample one and just use the same kick drum throughout, because this is like a 4 to the floor kind of a thing, you know. So just find the best one and just copy and paste only, right? Okay. If you're wondering why there's like 5 tracks for the kick, because I also made sure I captured from the overhead and the room, because I want the ambient, the air and the room sound around it also. Okay. So that's why you see sometimes it ends up with so many tracks. Then the snare, okay, the snare, marching snare rolls, okay. This one needed some bit of work lah. As you can see here, a little bit of editing here and there, and especially at the back, right? So I think you all remember, right? At the end of that section, the transition going in, the timing was a little bit weird. So in the end, okay, these are actually two takes there of the snare, right? Of the snare roll part. Yeah, so it sounds a lot more better, a lot consistent already now. Hey, moving on, let's check out the rest of the song. So these crashes, same thing. I just took the best one and just copied it. So it's the same, exactly the same. Okay, then here is the natural normal. So around the fill just now, you notice, right? Some editing. Right back section, all the way to the end, no more edits, man. Just kept it natural because especially last chorus, I really liked his energy and his groove lah. When it gets to the last chorus, maybe a little bit of rush is actually okay because a little bit of rush gives it that sense of energy. You see, it feels like there's a bit more energy, there's a bit more dynamics. So again, it's a judgment call as a producer lah, right? Of how much do you want? Okay, cool. So guys, clear on that on this editing, right? So again, right? When it's necessary, if it's not really necessary, try to avoid it lah. Try to avoid it, right? Especially if you're working with a very good drummer or a drummer who's already got a very nice groove to it. If you don't want to go and remove all the human element out of it lah. You want to keep it as natural as possible. But if you get into a situation where, okay, no choice lah, you have to lah, okay, the band wants to, must be the real life drummer, no programming, then okay, you have to do this lah. Now, granted, in some cases, if let's say if I was just hired as an engineer to record, but if they want to do this this is actually extra work, so now to be fair, usually I will usually charge lah extra, right? But again, it's up to you, right? Whether you want to do, because this takes a long time, it takes several hours to do, and then if you want to do it for free, it's up to you lah. Okay, right? Sometimes you tell them that you have to charge for all this editing, actually, they actually will perform better because they know that they cannot be too they think that never mind lah, later can edit everything. Then they're a little bit more serious. Oh, okay. Let's make sure, I get it right, everything get it better. Sometimes, right, psychology, right, with the musicians have to do it that way. Now the next thing we're gonna go into, right, so you have drum editing. Now I'm going to move into drum sample replacement and drum resampling. Okay. Now, drum sample replacement. Anyone ever did it? Has anyone used it before? Has anyone heard of it? Do you know that such a thing exists? You know, right? Do you know, Ben? Do you know? Do you know? Is not sure. You've heard of it, lah, but not sure, lah, right? It's super surprising. There are a lot of musicians who actually have never heard of it before. And that is sometimes maybe a reason why the expectation of some musicians and drummers get a bit disappointed when they record, you see. This drum sampling has been around since the late 70s, right? But in the late 70s, it was very, very hard to do, lah. But I think the most the modern example of where drum resampling came into play was in the 90s. It started with Nirvana's album, okay, because that's where probably the first super very major hit that you can point to and say, oh, drum resampling was used there. So look, from the 90s, 2000s onwards until now, right? It's actually a very common thing when you deal with rock, modern rock stuff, especially when you talk about rock drums lah. But even in pop, so it's actually very common. So because it's not a common knowledge to the musicians, right? Sometimes the expectations is not there. They think, oh, I can sound like that. But when they record a day, like, why I cannot get that sound, huh? They didn't realize there's a lot of resampling involved. Okay, yeah, there's so much. It's a part and parcel of a modern production techniques already, right? So it's very hard to run away from it. Now again, goes back to your point of, as a producer, what is the concept lah? If you're working with a blues band, right, something a little bit more bluesy, they want it a bit more natural, more organic, then don't use drum samples, right? Keep it a little bit more raw, organic. But of course, make sure the drummer can deliver consistency as well, lah, right? The weight and the pressure of expectancy to deliver in the final product is not always on the engineer or the producer's hand. A lot of it really boils down to the musicians and the players. They have to really put in their share of the work as well, lah. They cannot berharap bergantung and expect engineer producer to produce magic. We can't create magic if what is given or what's delivered, right, isn't really great to begin with lah. We can't deliver that lah, right? So everything is important. So drum resampling, okay. Now, there are several ways to do it. Now, you can most DAWs now will have a built-in function, have some kind of built-in function due to some kind of a drum resampling, right? Or you can always use a third party, right? You can always use a third party software to do drum resampling. Okay, now let me just very quickly just sort of show you how to do both lah. Right, so one, using an internal one. uh, my technique of course is going to be specific to Cubase, but this actually applies to, well, it'll apply to every software as well. Okay, so let's look into, let's say, this section of the verse. Okay, this is like roughly 4 bars of the verse. So double click it. This will open up the editor window. Okay. All right. And you can kind of see already, right? Some of these. In Cubase, they refer to it as hit points. Okay. I think in Pro Tools, Logic, they will have their own, they refer it to something different as well. They have tap to transient or something like that, right? They define it some as in a different way. So these are the kick tracks. This is the kick drum. So you can see kick drum is here. 1, 2, 3. These are all the kick drum. So in Cubase, this is using what we call hit points, right? So let's go and click on the edit hit points. Oh, all right. Automatically, it will detect all the hit points already. Okay, now, so what we end up here, okay, actually, hang on a second. Let me just sort of highlight this so that we will just cycle around this area. Yes, okay. So we just cycle around this area. Now, obviously, this is too many already. It's picking up all the tiny transients as well. Okay, you don't want that. So what you need to do is you need to play with the threshold. So threshold, right, means what's the level that you want to detect the transients. Okay, so if it's 100%, nothing, right? So you want to bring it down until you catch the hits that you want. So which is, let's see, okay, this is cool. Okay, this is missing one here. So let's bring the threshold down a little bit further. There we go. There we got it. Now we got it. So at about a value of 17, right? We got all of this. So there are other couple of parameters you can also adjust, but the main thing here is you want to adjust your threshold. You want to make sure that you are capturing all the transients that you want. In this case, the kick drum, right? Without capturing the unnecessary things, like for example, you've got the snare hit or tom fill or something like that. You want to make sure. Okay, now so this workflow again is applicable to Cubase, but all the DAWs will also have similar function. So once you have already detected the hit points, okay, you go to create MIDI notes from hit points. So let's go here, right? So what it does, it will convert the hit points to MIDI notes, right? So here, this is velocity mode. So velocity mode means dynamic. You have several modes. This is dynamic velocity. So dynamic here in this case means that it will create the MIDI notes based on the dynamics of the actual audio. So if the audio is softer, louder, right, the MIDI note velocity will also follow. So sometimes you want this because this will give you a more natural drum sample when you play it back using your drum samples. Okay, so you can either do dynamic velocity or you can go fixed velocity. Fixed velocity means when the MIDI notes get generated, it'll all be fixed. Okay, so pros and cons, it's up to you what you want. Okay, there's no right, there's no wrong. But let's go with dynamic first so you can sort of see. Then you can also determine the pitch. Pitch means what note MIDI note you want to generate lah. So in this case, C1. Okay, C1 is they choose C1 because C1 by default, right, on the MIDI notes, the MIDI note scale, C1 is where the kick drum is, right? Kick drum is usually on C1. So destination, new MIDI track. So okay, pop. So here you go. So as you can see, the MIDI track is generated, okay, because I only selected this region. So all of it is at C1, and it also follows the dynamics. Okay, let me double click this. Oh, because my setting is to edit in place. So never mind. You can see it from here as well. See, so it actually follows the dynamics a little bit, all right? So it's a little bit louder, slightly softer. It's following the natural dynamics when the player is playing lah. Okay. So if I did a fixed velocity, it will give you a fixed value. So this is one thing. So from this part onwards, you can send this to, for example, I just say kick MIDI, for example, kick MIDI. You can send it to a sample library. In this case, what I'm using will be Steven Slate Drums 5. Let me sort of show you. Okay, so it's going to send to this. I already pull up a sample already. Okay, so it's going to play back. Hopefully, it's the right note. Let's see. Yeah. See, it's following the dynamics. Okay, this is a little bit too soft lah, okay, because it's based on the audio, so sometimes you need to compensate, right, to the actual dynamics. This is very soft. This is like very soft. Okay. Okay, so what I will do here, let's go back into this MIDI track and let's go into velocity. Okay, let's select all of it. Now, I want to preserve the dynamics in this case, right? So I just scale all of this vertically. Again, in your own DAW, there are ways of doing it your own way lah, but similarly, it will do the same thing. So let's scale it up to about here. Let's play it back and see. A bit more. Okay, right. So you can see, right? So this is more reflective of the actual dynamics that it's supposed to hit, lah, right? Because MIDI doesn't know. It just reads the data and just pumps it out that way. So you have to tweak it, right, to be more appropriate. So let's listen to this section again. Right. Softer. All right. Softer. You can hear, right? It follows the dynamics. So you can do it that way. You probably need to tweak a little bit because the first hit, there's some of the hits may be a little bit too hard, right? So you need to also need to tweak lah, right? There's a saying, I think, right, that goes set and don't forget, right? You set it, but don't forget, you still need to tweak it to make sure that it's appropriate one. So sometimes your preset or whatever, the things that's generated by the computer, by the whatever program MIDI, go back and check it, okay? Because don't trust the machine, don't trust the artificial intelligence that's coming soon, okay? That's that. Don't trust it 100%. Okay, now this is using the built-in function. Again, let me disable this again. Now, how about using a third-party software? Now, the built-in functions, right? using the hit point detectors and all that, they are not as intelligent. So what I mean by intelligent is they only look at the transient. It's not as discerning, it's not as intelligent to look at things like, say, frequency content. It's and some of it is not tuned or calibrated, right? It's not coded in a way to be more suitable for drums, for example. So that's why there are also third party, right, drum triggering and drum resampling replacement software, right, that's made specifically for drums lah, right? So if you can always invest in that. So the ones that I have, okay, let me remove this. Okay, I'm going to show you. The one that I have is called where is it? Okay, okay, let's bring it down here. This is called Trigger 2, right? By Steven Slate, the company Steven Slate, right? So this is the user interface. So a couple of things that I want to point out. First of all, the controls here will be sensitivity. Sensitivity means how sensitive it is to the transient lah, right? The kick drum. Retrigger. So this is you can see this is a millisecond value. So retrigger means that how much of a gap, right, before it will retrigger the next note. So this is important because you might not want to accidentally trigger something, right, another sound. Or in the case of, let's say, again, we talk about metal or double pedal, right, you may need to reduce the retrigger value to a shorter, smaller value, because so that you will catch all the double pedal hits, you see, right? But default settings, to me, this works 90% of the time. The default setting, they've tuned it that way lah. So detail here is equivalent to, is the same thing as what I showed you earlier with the hit point detection. It's similar to the threshold value lah, in that case. So inside here, they refer to as detail. So let's just put it all the way up first. Okay, so let's start. Okay, let's do this same 8-bar section. Okay, let's just start by playing audio. All right, a little bit different. With hit point, you can do it offline, but with this, you need to do it real time. Okay, so let's play it. Yep, and then you can sort of see the waveform there. Okay, right. There's an input trim here, an input to the plugin, right? So if, for example, the waveform is very small, you can bring up the gain lah, or if it's too big, right? The input is too loud, you can trim it down. What you want to see is that you want to see the waveform kind of, so it can take advantage of the full dynamic range lah of the plugin. So the plugin has the most area to work with. Because if it's very small, alamak, everything you need to adjust very small, adjust very low, you see. So you want to give it as much room to work with. So this is fine, okay? So sensitivity, I'll leave it at default. Retrigger, I'll leave it at the default settings, okay? I'll bring the detail down. Okay, oops. Okay, let's go back here. Down. Let's turn the detail down. So we want to capture only the kicks, not the snare. Obviously, the snare is very soft lah, so it's not going to capture lah. There you go. Okay. Now you can actually go down a little bit lower if you want, right? Because it's still a very clean capture, and you're not going to pick up the snare lah. Okay, cool, right? Doesn't pick up the toms or so. Trigger actually has its own built-in sample library. Well, it's the same set of samples lah, but it's a little bit more limited. So I'm not going to load the samples in here lah. I would use back just now the SSD5, the sample player to trigger the drums. Okay. Now here is another thing that maybe just very quickly point out, and where the third party software has a bit more advantage. Right. You can also filter. You can have a sidechain filter. Right. Right. So this filter here will help to tune the range of frequencies that the trigger is more sensitive to. So you can, narrow it down, you see, right? So with the DAW, it doesn't know. It just, okay, it sees a transient, it will just mark it for you lah. It doesn't know what it is. But here you can tune it. So if you, in this case, kick drum, we want to, right, go for more of the lower frequencies. So we can just bring it down, right? Everything all the way to, let's say, maybe 400 hertz, yeah. So 0 to 400 hertz, everything 400 hertz below. So it can be a little bit more accurate, right? So likewise, if you go with snare, maybe you don't need everything below 100, you see. right? And you don't need above 10K because you don't need all the hi-hat and the cymbal to accidentally trigger it. Okay, but in this case, kick drum, keep it low, low cut all the way down, high cut at 400 hertz. So it makes the trigger more accurate. Okay, oh, okay. I won't change anything about the detail. All right, so now this is in particular in Steven Slate in Trigger 2 they have a gate, right? So you know gates you can open and close, right? But the built-in gate inside Trigger 2 is one of the, if not one of the best sounding gates I have ever encountered, I've ever used. You know, it's better than the stock ones, it's better than a lot some of the gate plugins that you get, and definitely better than the stock ones lah. So I'll just very quickly, I'll just show you, see how it sounds. So this is gate off, gate on. No more snare, all right? It's very, very, very tight sounding. Okay, I can always play with the attack faster. Okay, one of the snares gets through. So what I can do that is I can bring the release a little bit shorter. If I bring the release shorter, it makes it tighter. Yeah, and yeah, you basically kill the sustain lah, right? So again, it depends, right? Do you want something with a little bit more sustain? You want to keep more of the original sustain, or you can always keep it like super tight like this if you want. Okay, right? So that's where you can play with gates. Bring it back up. Right, so here with the release back at about 400 milliseconds, you still hear the boom, right, a little bit of a sustain from the kick drum lah. Okay, but in this exercise, all right, I'll turn it off. Let's turn it off. Okay, this is just to show you. So what we do with with the Trigger 2, what it does is you have to do it real time. So what it's doing every time you're playing the audio, it actually has a buffer that actually captures, right, all of the information, and right, and captures the MIDI. So what you need to do first is you clear the buffer. Okay, let's give it a longer section lah. Let's play from the intro. Okay, and then when you're ready to capture, right, just press play, let it do the work. Let's do the intro. Boop, da, boop, boop. Okay, right. Let's ready into the verse ready. Okay, let's just stop for now lah. Right, don't have to go through the whole song. Okay, so once you've done that, it's just a simple case. You just drag it into your project window. Just drag it in. Da, da, da. Okay. For me to be safe, I always drag it to the start point. Drag and drop. Ta-da! Here we go. So same thing. This will be a kick MIDI. Okay, now in this case, let's take a look around. Now in this case, here we go. The color shading is a little bit, could be a little bit better and a little bit clearer. Maybe I need to change the color presets on this. But because I'm so used to it, I know it's a little bit hard for you all to see lah. But you all can see, right? Can see, right? Yeah. Okay, so same thing. It also responds dynamically as well. Okay. All right. So make sure that it is routed to SSD5. But in this case, it's going to the wrong node. It's actually going to C -2, right? Uh, this actually is something, a setting that can be, it actually should be able to be, let me take a look. It's actually something that you can actually configure MIDI out one. Yes, exactly. Okay, yes, exactly. Right. So the MIDI in, you should be able to set it to C1, which is, where is C1? There you go. Keynote 36, right? So actually within trigger, you can actually set lah what note you want to output lah. Okay, all right. But if it's in this case, right, it's going to the wrong note, right? You need to remap it again lah. Okay. Fortunately, I have built-in presets, which I and macros, and already I've set it already. So poop, set notes to C1. Ta-da! Okay, automatically it'll do it for me lah. Right. Okay. There are actually lots of other cool macros which can do a lot of creative things as well, but not going to go into that. Okay, so this is again going to the SSD5, this Steven Slate Drums 5, okay, and it's going to be triggering. Let's listen to it. Yeah. Okay, see, these ones were a little bit soft because depending on the sample, the velocity layers that are inside, again, that's what I mean lah. You sometimes will need to tweak this as well lah. Okay, all right. So now, why do all these third-party plugins exist? Number one reason is it's for the workflow. It is a lot faster, so to speak, all right? Because with Trigger, you not only can you trigger it, but you can also, all right, it has already its built-in sounds and samples inside here, lah, right? You can always load, for example, you can always load the kick drums into it. You can load into here, you see, right? You can load all the samples into that. You can also layer, okay, as you can see, you can layer, I think, up to eight different sounds if you want to lah. But obviously, right, it gives you so many other functions lah. You can play around with your thresholds, your sensitivity, your detail. You can have a filter section, you have a gate, all right, and all that. So these are all very nice bonuses to have with a third party. But for me, the greatest benefit with using this is that this one, the tracking is very precise. The way that they've designed the plugin, the coding, how they've optimized it. This so far has been the most accurate drum sample formula in my experience. And drum sample and triggering software has been around for it's been around for decades. It's been around for like 20 years already. But this has been the most tightest, most accurate one so far. What I mean by that is that I'm so confident in how it is that I do not really need to go back and check it again. I still do lah, right? But I can be confident enough that pretty much 99% of the time the tracking is on point one, right? The hit points, using hit points, right? It's not necessary going to be on because again, it's not tuned. It doesn't know whether it's a drum or is it a vocal or some other thing. Is it that's creating the transient? So it's not tuned towards drums. So you may have to manually adjust lah. Moving on. Let's move on. Now I have as usual all these things I already pre-done already. I already prepared already back in my studio before coming in here. So as you can see, I already have my kick and my snare MIDI already done before this. Earlier on, I showed you, right, what you can either have it dynamically, you can either generate the notes following the dynamics, or you can do a fixed velocity. Now, in some cases, right, if you want to really keep it natural, you can keep it you can keep it dynamics lah. Right, you can keep it, you can set it so that it will respond dynamically. But in this situation, what I've done, and because it's a very good capture, I really like the dynamics, original dynamics that's being played by the drummer. So I don't really want to mess with that. I don't really need to do anything. In this case, what I'm going to use the samples is I'm going to use it as a layer. I'm going to layer it underneath the original kick that's been mic'd up, just to enhance it. So what I have, right, in this case, let's take a look at my MIDI velocities. Let me zoom it up so you can see. It's actually quite fixed, quite level, right? I set it to about 100, all right, and some of the lower kicks at about 90, and some of these set notes at about 75, right? And it's all consistent one, right? So for example, if I have a tuk ta tuk tuk ta, I keep that steady, but I have a tuk tuk ta, right? So the softer one, I keep it at the softer velocity. This one I've manually done it, okay? Because what I'm trying to do here in this case with layering, the drummer has his natural dynamics. I don't want to mess with it. What I'm doing underneath is I'm adding that very consistent layer of the samples, right? That makes it more solid lah. That's it, right? I want to keep the original performance, but add that added element of that solid performance underneath. Okay, so this is all already done. Okay, the kick sample, as you can see, snare, same thing, snare. All right, I kept it all the way 1 to 7, so it's like a powerful. Okay, modern rock. Okay, your kick and your snare needs to be powerful. Needs to have a powerful backbeat. Pa, it needs to be really solid, right? And in some cases, with some style of music, it'll be more aggressive. It needs to be on the rim shot all the way, pong, pang, and that sort of thing. Okay, so except for you can see here, this part. Okay, let's turn it on. Ching, ta, ching, ta, ching, ta, right? That snare in between, right, is on the upbeat is usually slightly softer lah. Okay, so I've done that. Now I've loaded actually one kick drum sample. This is a kick Pearl 22. All right, BR. I think is Birch. H. H here it means hard beater. So they have their way of coding lah, right? So this is with a hard solid beater, gives a much better attack. And I got two different snares. This is a snare. It's I don't know what brand, how to pronounce it. All right, it's, 7-inch custom snare, and another one here. This is the snare Vinnie Paul. Okay, so anybody who knows who Vinnie Paul is, Vinnie Paul's the drummer of this band Pantera. Okay, right. So only if you're into like 90s and 2000 metal, then you know Pantera is lah. Okay, but his signature snare, right, is a 14 by 8 snare drum, 8-inch snare drum. Oh, that's super thick, right? So you can imagine that it's a very big, fat, deep snare sound. Okay, do you guys know the band Paramore? Right, Paramore, right? Obviously, it's a huge influence. A lot of bands, right, love the snare sound from Paramore. All right, they literally call it the Paramore snare sound, right? So a lot of pop punk bands, modern rock bands, are, wow, when that snare sound came out, they followed it, right? So the producer, right, of the band, right, his name is David Bendeth, right? So the snare drum that he used for that is this. Is the Vinnie Paul signature model. It's a 14 by 8 snare drum, very very deep. So that kind of fat snare sound that was very very popular in like mid in the late 2010s until now, right? Snare drum sound is fashionable. It's like clothing. It's like fashion. Every couple of years it changes, right? You have one couple of years is like piccolo, then another year it goes towards the fat sound, and 10 years time, it goes to another thing. So it's like fashion lah, okay? So this is still very fashionable in the Vinnie Paul Paramore kind of snare sound is still very very fashionable when it comes to like rock, punk rock, and the more aggressive, hard hitting styles lah. Cause it's fat, it's a very very fat sound. So it's one kick and two snares that layered into it. Okay, so what I've already done is I already exported all the samples. Okay, so we can actually mute the MIDI, right? And I've exported it down here. Okay, so you have the kick Pearl. So let me just solo the kick Pearl so we can take a listen here. Okay, very nice, re-recorded, right? Drum sample, very consistent. And this is the Hoyer, I don't know, Hoyer, how we pronounce it. This one is slightly more higher pitch tune, all right? Tune is slightly higher. And the Vinnie Paul, right? You hear it, then you know it's instantly ready. Right? It's that low, fat kind of sound with a lot of ring to it. Okay, but in addition to And in addition to all the direct snare sounds, most of these sample libraries and sample packs will also have your ambient or your room sound. They usually have a a pair or maybe more of room mics capturing the room sound as well. Because the room sound is very important towards the drum, uh, especially you're talking about rock lah. Now, if you want like maybe a 60s Motown or R&B-ish kind of sound where it's very tight, very dry, then the room mics are not so important, you see, right? But room really gives the it really makes a difference between whether the drum sounds lively, aggressive, and powerful, or whether instead or something that's a little bit eh, dead, a little bit lifeless. You see, room plays a very very big important. So it also comes with the room samples. So this is how room samples sound like. Yeah. Okay. Right. So it's a summary of everything. Right. Okay, cool. Now, you can always, with resampling, always kind of go a little bit further beyond this if you want to. For example, if you want to resample toms, for example, lah, okay? Now, if you want to, lah. Now, that's not necessary. I find toms a little bit trickier to resample, and most of the time, uh, even though the recording is, unless it's really terrible, most of the time I can make most toms work lah. Most mic'd up toms, we can work it. So very seldom do I find the need that I have to resample toms. On rare occasions, I will have to resample the ride. Okay, now that will be a lot tougher, right? Because again, you have to sort of tune in and key into that certain frequency, adjust the detail, you have to play around with it, right? And it's a lot harder if you use the stock methods, like, or like, for example, in DAW using hit points, okay? It's a lot harder. Sometimes cymbals also, you may need to resample, but with cymbals, I don't need to resample. With cymbals, usually I just manually drag and drop it because cymbals don't happen all the time, you see. It's only usually during, the specific hits or specific attacks. So if I need to, right, cymbal hits, I will just manually drag in a sample. So, right, hopefully this gives you like a glance of what the drum sample replacement can bring, right? What kind of enhancement, it's just a tool. It's just not a tool. It's not cheating. It's not, it's not, you're not deceiving the listener. There are some people who are, the purists, right? Who, no, cannot use samples. Everything must be perfect, raw. Now, again, I don't mind doing it, but the drummer, can you deliver it that way or not? It depends on the drummer, right? Not so much on your tools. Of course, your recording needs to be good as well, right? Engineer needs to be good at recording it as well. But so much depends on the drummer. If the drummer cannot deliver it that way, don't expect the recording and the miking to sound like that lah. Okay. Okay, now, sidetrack a little bit. Let me backtrack a little short while. You might have seen a little bit of editing which I've done here on the toms. Okay, and you might be wondering what's going on here, lah. Toms, obviously, it only plays during the tom fills. Okay, so at the other times, right, the mics which are open are going to be picking up all the bleed, the rest of the kit while it's playing. Now, uh it may not necessarily be desirable, okay, because it's bleed, it's leakage, right? So it's all the other sound from the rest of the kit bleeding into the tom mics. So in the past, what people do is they sometimes will use a gate, right? Like I showed you earlier, a gate. When the tom's not playing, the gate closes, right? It mutes the audio from the track. When the tom fills come in, then it opens lah. I don't like to use gates, and I think a lot of people nowadays tend not to use them anymore, because gates, again, they're not intelligent. You set a setting, and then it not necessarily will work for all part of the song. Sometimes something else triggers. Maybe one snare hit is a little bit loud, suddenly it will open the gate, right? Then you suddenly hear the snare sound. Why suddenly goes a bit louder, right? And it can make it worse lah. Also, on the other hand, the gates also can be a bit problematic if cymbals. So sometimes what happens with the gates, right, and high frequency noise is when they open and close. When it opens, suddenly you get the high frequency blast, psst, of sound. So that can be problematic as well. That's where samples sometimes will be in handy, you see. So on another point is the bleed and the leakage actually it's actually important. It's what we call the glue. It helps to glue the sound of the drum kit together. Because just stand in front of the drum kit or be sit in where the drummer is, right? Imagine yourself the drummer. When you play and you play everything, right? You're playing the drum kit, even though if you're just playing your kick, snare, and hi-hat, boom, ta, boom, ta, you're just playing a basic beat like that. What happens? The toms, everything, while you're playing it, it resonates. Every time you kick drum, toms will ring a little bit, although very soft lah. It's actually natural. It actually is part of what a real live drum sounds like. So if you were to gate and totally silence out, it actually feels a bit more fake. It feels more detached, everything. Wow, to me lah, that's my opinion. Anyway, okay. So that's why the leakage is actually good. It's actually good. It's actually there. It helps you make the kit feel real. It helps to gel the sound together. But the leakage is there, but I want to control it. So what I do, and with the beauty of DAWs and editing nowadays, is so easy to do. Okay, what we do is we actually just need to edit it out. Now again, if you someone who prefers to silence it, you can always silence lah if you want to lah. But for me, no. So what we do here, okay, is I want to make sure that I cut at the transient just before the tom. I do a little edit. Now, when it comes to editing, remember you can always bring the cursor so that it snaps. You can always snap the cursor as I showed, so that it will, for example, snap to the snap to the grid lah. So wherever I click, it will always snap to the grid line. So even if I click here, it will snap to the closest. Now there's another option which I think most DAWs will definitely have it. It's very important. I want to point out to you guys. This is called snap to zero crossing. Okay, now why are zero crossings important? Okay, anybody got an answer right now? Why is zero crossing important? Right? Okay, it's the same reason why the crossfading is important. You don't want to, you cannot chop a waveform in the middle, right? So if I ignore this, if I just chop this in the middle, right? Okay, and delete this, what happens here? The waveform suddenly starts at that value, that peak value. And in a digital system, what does the DA converters interpret it? It interprets it as a pop, as a click. So you get a digital click. So that's what happens, you see, right? So that's why crossfades are important. You don't want any of the waveforms to suddenly jump to a value. So in this case, it suddenly jumps up to this value here. Okay, you get a click. That's bad, right? So when you set, okay, in this case, all right, in Cubase, we can snap to a zero crossing. So in this case, when you select an edit point, it will snap to a zero crossing. So zero crossing means, right, wherever, right, it's at the zero value. So if you do an edit at the zero value, the digital audio, the signal doesn't jump straight away. So you get no clicks, right? So this is a very important thing. So this is what I've done. So I've set this to snap at at the zero crossing. So I just drag it and see where the nearest zero crossing is lah. So obviously not here, because this one here, the tom already start playing, right? So it's already cutting it off. So before the transient, which is here lah. So I've done it for all the toms all the way, right? Now, so this is the start of the tom. Now at the end, how far back do you want to let it go, right? So for me, I let it sustain, right, naturally. And again, if you want to cut it short, you can also cut it short lah. But generally, the next point of where I edit out, right, have a listen, okay, will be the whenever there's high-end frequency range, the cymbals. Okay, so let me just bring this up first, so you can have an idea of how it sounds. Okay, so this is just prior to editing. Okay, you can hear this is just the let's solo just the toms lah, because just now you're hearing the sample. So you're getting that. So that's all the leakage from the that's going into tom mics. Sounds good, but it's a bit too much of it. You don't want, because you get all the ringing. You see, it's ringing, and then you get the you can hear the ride, you can hear the crash, right, going to tom mics. So for me, the bleed and all the leakage is actually good. As I mentioned, it actually helps to glue the sound. It's part of the sound of a real live drum, right? So I don't want to get rid of it altogether. Again, you can if you want to, if that's the kind of style that you want. But let's take okay, we've heard how it sounds. So what I'm going to do is I will just select the sections. Okay, for example, this part, and I will just turn the gain down. I will trim the gain. I will just do a clip gain and clip gain it down. Okay, so it's very easy to do nowadays in any modern DAW lah, right? Just clip, 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 bring the gain down of the clip here. So how much do you want to bring down? Now, there's no fixed value, right? You can bring it down as much as you want. I generally go for around between 10 minus 10 to 15 minus 15 dB, so that the leakage is, so that means the bleed whenever the toms is not playing is between that lah, between 10 to 15 dB. The great thing about this, again, you can always tweak it. You want to hear a little bit more of that, a little bit more rawer, slightly more raw sound, then yes, keep it maybe 8 9 dB lah, 10 dB lah. If you want it to be more cleaner, you can always bring it down all if you want. So I kind of found the sweet spot that I like to be about 15 dB, right? Minus 15, roughly lah, agak-agak, right? You don't have to be super precise. So let's take a listen. So it's still there. Okay, that was opposed to, see? Oh, see? Much cleaner, right? So it's still there. You can hear it softly, but it's still there lah, right? All right, okay, so that's what I got to share with you guys, and to sort of show you the post-production techniques, right, related to drums lah, right? So we talked about, I showed you a little bit of what I did with drum editing, and also the drum sample replacement. Okay, so again, these are things you can always approach this in two ways. All right, I always look at post-production and mixing techniques and all this in two ways. You either want to look at it as a corrective process, where you want to fix problems, where you want to fix issues, when you want to fix inconsistencies or imperfections. That's one way. But again, it can also be a creative, right? Creative thing. So creative in this sense that you want to tweak the groove a little bit, right? You want to adjust the groove of the drums, then you can do it with some editing, right? Then you want to, for example, with drum sample replacement, you want to layer a different snare sound. You want to layer a sample which has a lot of reverb, maybe you want to, or even, let's say, you want to change the kick to a 808, like a club kick, right? Or you want to put like a snare, a clap, or some other sample. These are all creative decisions lah, right? It's entirely up to you. All right, so we're gonna go for a break after this, and so see you back, all right, in the next slot, next session.